I am 72 years old. The heavy glass tumbler slipped right through my fingers and shattered violently against the bathroom tile on a quiet Tuesday morning, sending sharp shards of ice and freezing water skittering across the floor in every direction. I did not drop the glass because my hands were wet. I dropped it because the very second that freezing, ice-cold water hit the back of my throat and rushed down my esophagus, a sudden, terrifying vice grip clamped down entirely around my chest. My breath caught in my lungs, my vision narrowed to a tight, dark tunnel, and a heavy rhythmic pounding instantly started hammering at the base of my skull. Gloria was in the kitchen, completely unaware that I was leaning heavily against the bathroom sink, gripping the porcelain edges so hard my knuckles were turning white, waiting for my own heart to stop racing. It took 2 full minutes for the violent squeezing sensation in my chest to slowly fade away, leaving me trembling and covered in a cold sweat. I stood there staring at the melted ice on the floor, realizing with a sickening drop in my stomach that a simple 30-second habit I had been forcing myself to do every single morning was actively triggering a cardiovascular crisis inside my own body. There is a quiet, dangerous misunderstanding about how we are supposed to wake our bodies up, and today I need to lay out 3 absolute realities that you will rarely hear in a standard medical checkup. We need to examine the hidden physiological shock that occurs when you introduce freezing temperatures to a dormant internal system. The exact mechanical reason this sudden shift forces your blood pressure to spike into the danger zone, and the simple, gentle adjustment I made to my mornings that finally allowed my arteries to stay open and my heart to beat with a steady, unburdened rhythm. I am not a cardiologist, and I am not giving you clinical instructions to replace your doctor. I am simply an older man who had to learn the terrifying way that shocking your system in the name of health is the fastest way to permanently break it. You do not want the first real warning to be an emergency, and you certainly do not want to trigger that emergency with your own 2 hands. For the better part of a decade, I firmly believed that the human body required a harsh, violent jolt to properly wake up and start burning energy. I had read an article in a health magazine years ago that claimed drinking a massive glass of ice-cold water the absolute second you got out of bed would instantly jumpstart your metabolism, shock your nervous system into alertness, and fortify your body for the day ahead. The article made it sound like an act of pure discipline, because the men of my generation were raised to equate physical discomfort with character and resilience. I adopted the habit without a single second thought. Every morning, I would walk straight to the refrigerator, fill a large glass with solid ice cubes, pour filtered water over them, and chug the freezing liquid in less than 30 seconds. It felt like swallowing a bolt of lightning. It was jarring, uncomfortable, and it made my eyes water, but I proudly told myself that I was building a tougher internal engine. When my blood pressure started creeping up into the highly dangerous 160/90 range, I blamed my age. I blamed my past diet. I blamed the stress of my career. It never once occurred to me that I was starting every single morning by deliberately dropping a massive biological bomb into my own chest. I was trapped in a paradox where I mistook the physical panic of my cardiovascular system for a healthy burst of morning energy. I spent most of my adult life working in public transportation operations right here in Charlotte, eventually supervising the dispatch center and managing the mechanical maintenance of our heavy city buses. Because of that long career, I naturally view the world through the unyielding laws of mechanics, thermal dynamics, and closed pressure systems. If you walk into a heavy diesel maintenance bay, there is an absolute cardinal rule about temperature and metal. If you have an engine block that is running hot, or even an engine block that is just resting at a warm baseline temperature, you never, under any circumstances, introduce a sudden rush of freezing cold fluid into that system. The physics are brutal and immediate. When extreme cold hits warm material, the material violently and rapidly contracts. We call it thermal shock. If you spray freezing water onto a hot brake drum, the sudden aggressive contraction will physically warp the heavy steel and crack the iron wide open. The sudden shift in temperature forces the structure to shrink faster than it can naturally adjust, creating massive, unmanageable tension. Our human cardiovascular system responds to extreme temperature changes in the exact same mechanical way. What I did not understand, and what that fitness magazine completely failed to mention, is that the human body is a carefully balanced, warm internal environment, especially right after 8 hours of sleep. Your blood vessels are resting. Your internal temperature is heavily regulated. When you wake up, walk to the kitchen, and rapidly swallow 30 ounces of freezing ice water, that liquid travels straight down your esophagus, which sits mere millimeters away from your heart and your vagus nerve. The sudden, massive drop in core temperature triggers an immediate thermal shock. Your nervous system panics, believing you have just been plunged into freezing water. To preserve your core body heat, your brain sends a violent electrical signal to every artery and blood vessel in your body, commanding them to instantly clamp down tight. It is a massive, instantaneous vasoconstriction. Your pipes shrink, but your heart, which was just resting quietly, is suddenly forced to pump heavy, morning-thick blood through a vascular system that has just shrunk to half its normal size. The pressure inside those lines spikes dangerously and aggressively high. The pump works twice as hard, the engine runs hot, and the rigid, constricted lines are pushed to the absolute breaking point. The pressure rarely goes up alone. It goes up with the habits we ignore. I had been completely ignoring the fact that my daily display of morning discipline was actually a violent thermal shock to my own heart. I know exactly what happens when a man subjects his body to violent morning shocks, because I watched a senior dispatcher at the transit authority live through the devastating consequences. His name was Arthur, a man carved out of pure stubbornness who boasted that he had not taken a sick day in 30 years. Arthur loved the cold shock. He bragged that he took freezing cold showers every morning in the dead of winter and drank nothing but ice water to keep himself sharp. He thought it made him invincible, but Arthur carried a heavy belly, and he kept a bottle of blood pressure pills in his top desk drawer. One morning in late November, he arrived at the depot, grabbed a large cup of crushed ice and water from the break room, and drank it down fast before heading to the dispatch board. 10 minutes later, he collapsed in the middle of the floor, clutching his chest. The sudden, aggressive vascular constriction from the freezing water, combined with the cold morning air and his already elevated blood pressure, created a perfect, lethal storm. The pipes clamped down so hard and so fast that his heart simply could not push the blood through the resistance. He suffered a massive myocardial infarction. He survived, but the damage to the muscle tissue in his heart was severe and permanent. He lost his stamina, he lost his ability to work the long shifts, and he was forced into a quiet, heavily medicated retirement. He did not lose his career because he was weak. He lost it because he completely misunderstood the mechanical limits of his own biology. The terrifying reality of my own morning habit was finally laid out for me in plain, undeniable science a few days after I shattered that glass in the bathroom. My daughter Danielle, who works as an assistant to a clinical nutritionist, came over for Sunday dinner. I pulled her aside into the living room, quietly told her about the dizzy spell, the tight chest, and the freezing water, and asked her if I was losing my mind. She did not laugh, and she did not dismiss my fear. She sat me down on the couch, pulled out her phone, and showed me a medical term I had never heard of before. It was called the cold pressor test. She explained that when cardiologists want to intentionally spike a patient's blood pressure in a laboratory setting to see how much stress the heart can handle, they do not make them run on a treadmill. They simply force the patient to plunge their hand into a bucket of ice water. The sudden cold exposure creates such a violent, immediate constriction of the blood vessels that the systolic blood pressure shoots up instantly. Danielle looked me in the eye and told me that by chugging a massive glass of ice water the second I woke up, I was essentially administering a high-stakes cardiac stress test to myself every single morning, right when my blood was naturally at its thickest and most prone to clotting. I felt a profound, heavy sense of realization wash over me. I had been acting as my own worst enemy, weaponizing a simple glass of water through pure, stubborn ignorance. I realized that if I wanted to protect my heart and bring those dangerous numbers down, I had to stop treating my body like a piece of cold steel that needed to be hammered into shape. I had to start treating it like a complex, delicate engine that required a slow, respectful warm-up. I decided right then and there to completely dismantle the foundation of my morning routine. I did not stop drinking water in the morning. Hydration is absolutely critical for thinning out the sluggish morning blood, but I made a hard, non-negotiable rule about the temperature of what enters my body. The ice trays were permanently banished from my morning routine. Now when I wake up, I walk into the kitchen and I fill the kettle. I do not boil the water to make a bitter cup of black coffee, which would just cause another harsh spike in adrenaline. I simply warm the water up. I pour a large glass of slightly warm, room temperature water, and I take it to the kitchen table. I sit down in the quiet of the morning and I drink it slowly. I do not chug it. I sip it over the course of 5 full minutes. The mechanical difference inside my chest is absolutely staggering. When you drink warm water slowly, there is no thermal shock. The warm liquid travels down the esophagus and sends a gentle, soothing signal to the vagus nerve. Instead of panicking and clamping down, the blood vessels receive a biological signal that the environment is safe. The arteries remain wide open, flexible, and relaxed. The warm fluid mixes into the bloodstream, naturally thinning the blood and increasing the overall volume without triggering a single alarm bell in the nervous system. The heart does not have to fight against restricted pipes. It just quietly and easily pumps the newly hydrated blood throughout the body. It adds exactly 5 minutes to my morning routine, but those 5 minutes are the crucial idling period that protects my internal engine from cracking under pressure. A steady life builds a steadier body, and my kitchen table became the quiet space where that stability is secured. The physical change in my daily life did not happen like a magic trick, but the biological relief was profound and undeniable. Within the first 2 weeks of abandoning the ice water shock, the tight, uncomfortable squeezing sensation I used to feel in my chest before breakfast completely vanished. The dull, persistent headache that used to follow me out the front door faded into nothing. I stopped feeling like I was holding my breath through the first hour of the day. My body was no longer starting the morning in a state of high alert, fighting a massive adrenaline surge caused by freezing temperatures. The engine was finally transitioning from sleep to wakefulness, smoothly, quietly, and without a single mechanical protest. When Marcus came over to the house a month later to help me clean out the gutters before the heavy autumn rains, the difference was visibly apparent. It was a crisp, chilly morning here in Charlotte. Normally, stepping out into the cold air would make me tense my shoulders and feel a sharp spike of pressure behind my ribs. But I had spent the morning sitting at the table, drinking my warm water, gently opening the lines. I climbed the aluminum ladder, cleared the heavy, wet leaves from the gutters, and worked steadily for an hour without losing my breath. Marcus stood at the bottom of the ladder, holding it steady, and told me I was moving with a calmness he had not seen in years. I climbed down, wiped my hands on an old rag, and told him the truth. I told him I had finally stopped trying to shock my body into submission. Marcus is 43 years old, a consultant who lives his life rushing from one crisis to the next, fueling his mornings with cold energy drinks and stress. I saw him looking at the coffee in his hand, realizing that his own daily habits were just quiet shocks compounding over time. Most people wait for a scare before they change. I had my scare in the bathroom with the shattered glass, and I was making sure my son understood the mechanics of his own body so he would never have to drop to his knees in his own home. Control begins with what you stop normalizing. I stopped normalizing the idea that physical shock was a requirement for health. When I sat on the crisp medical paper in Dr. Evans' examination room for my next quarterly checkup, I felt a deep, grounded sense of peace. I did not feel the rapid, terrified heartbeat of a man waiting for bad news. The automated gray cuff wrapped tightly around my arm. The machine whirred its steady rhythm, and the final numbers flashed bright on the digital monitor. 122/76. Dr. Evans leaned back in his chair, took his glasses off, and gave me a look of profound, genuine respect. He told me that my numbers were not just lower, they were completely stable. There were no wild spikes. He asked me if I had started a new, intense meditation program. I just smiled at him. I did not tell him about the transit dispatch center, or the thermal shock of the heavy brake drums, or the shattered glass on the bathroom tile. I just told him I had finally learned how to stop pouring freezing water on a warm engine. I am not cured, and I do not pretend that the threat of cardiovascular decline has been magically erased from my future. Managing high blood pressure is a lifelong, unyielding commitment. It is a daily contract you must honor with your own biology. The danger is always waiting patiently for you to return to the arrogant, destructive habits of your past. But the suffocating terror of fighting my own body is entirely gone. I do not view my mornings as a battleground anymore. I am sitting in my kitchen right now, looking out the window as the Carolina sun begins to break through the trees. The house is perfectly quiet. Gloria is still asleep down the hall. I am holding a warm glass of water in my hand, taking slow, deliberate sips. My chest is open. My breathing is deep and effortless. My heart is beating with a calm, unburdened, steady rhythm. The road ahead of us does not have to be a desperate fight against our own physical limits. It simply requires us to stop buying into the dangerous myths of harsh discipline, to take absolute ownership of the simple things we consume, and to do the quiet, gentle work of protecting the only engine we will ever have.